Welcome back, welcome back. Well, it's been a tumultuous year in Thailand following an election last Christmas which saw the restoration of a party supported by ousted Premier Thaksin. The country has seen street protests, violence, the occupation of Bangkok's airports and the ousting of 2 prime ministers. This week a new government was formed from the opposition. At its head a man that I interviewed just a few months ago in September on this programme. He was leader then of the opposition, but now I'm delighted to be joined from Bangkok by the new Prime Minister of Thailand, Abhisit Vejjajiva. Congratulations, Prime Minister.
Thank you.
How have the first few days been? More difficult than you expected or not?
No, I know very well that there are tough challenges ahead, and I've spent the last few days trying to meet as many groups as possible during the formation of the cabinet. So I begin to signal about what we want to do concerning the problems in the countryside, concerning the economy.
And how many, roughly speaking in terms of percentage, how many in the final cabinet will have survived from the previous cabinet?
I haven't really counted. I'm just determined to get down to work.
But is the cabinet totally formed as of today?
Today's cabinet will be made up of a number of parties that were in the previous coalition, as well as parties that were dissolved by the Constitutional Court ruling. Yes.
What's the most dramatic difference in terms of what your policy, the most dramatic difference compared with the last 2 governments?
We want to take the country forward. It will be different from the last year, which has been a lost year for Thailand. You might even say that we took a huge step backwards.
And what about Mr. Thaksin? Would you ever allow him to stand for election again?
Mr. Thaksin is like any other Thai. He should be under Thai law. He should come back and fight his cases, and if the courts rule that he should be punished, he must take that punishment.
Right, and then he might be able to stand again or not?
That's up to his qualifications. That will be according to the Constitution, like any other Thai.
The protests we've seen, rather spectacular, some of the pictures of the protests, but they were, relatively speaking, in terms of deaths and so on, they were, relatively speaking, peaceful protests. I mean, they were disruptive of the airport, but they weren't violent protests. Why was that? The people felt strongly.
Well, I think that just shows that it is in the nature of the Thai people not to be violent. But there were a number of regrettable incidents, and we're determined that those were the things of the past.
And what's your first priority? The economy, is it?
The economy, of course, but related to that is that I also assume the chairmanship of ASEAN, and I'm determined that we will be ready to host the ASEAN Summit by late January. That will be a way of restoring confidence and will help a lot in terms of make sure that the economy recovers.
And you've got to restore confidence too, I suppose, in the image of Thailand, those pictures of the riots and so on and so forth. Have they affected, for instance, tourism?
Of course. And I think it's understandable. You've been in the media for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, images are often a lot worse than the reality, and people only see those images. As I say, I'm sure that there are many people who are watching this program who know Thailand better. They have been familiar with Thailand as a land of smiles, land of the free, land of opportunity. And we're determined that that will all come back, while the pictures that you've seen over the last 2 to 3 years will no longer be seen.
In terms of the Democratic Party and so on, there are some of your supporters who want to sort of reduce democracy, really, I suppose, to the richer and to the more intelligent and so on. What do you think of that?
No, none of the Democrat Party members would want to reduce democracy. I have stood as a politician in democracy for 15, 16 years, and the party has stood for democracy for longer than 60 years. We want to take democracy forward. Democracy is not just majority rule, but it's all about good governance, accountability, transparency. These are the things that were destroyed during the Thaksin years. We want to restore that without affecting the key principle of democracy, which is one man, one vote.
I see, yes, absolutely. And so free speech will remain?
Of course. Free speech and freedom of expression, and any exercise of constitutional rights must be respected.
And to what extent do you rely on the support of the king and the monarchy? It's important for people to realise the king is behind you too, isn't it?
No, the monarchy is above partisan politics, is above all political conflicts, and we're determined to keep it that way.
Right, so you won't involve the king in your policies?
No, and indeed, my first speech to the Thai people, I have expressed my determination to protect this most revered institution by not allowing anybody to draw such an institution into political conflict.
Well, that's very clear that you're going to do that. And so how long do you think it will take to turn around, Prime Minister, turn around the image of Thailand, to get it back on the right footing?
Well, I hope it will be as soon as possible. And I think one concrete step is that when we host the ASEAN Summit, you will now see the images of Thailand that welcomes foreign leaders and safe.
Yes, and that will be a potent plus. And in general, in addition to the problems you were talking about of the Thai economy, to what extent, Prime Minister, does the worldwide climate of the economies of the world affect you? How much does that have an impact on Thailand? Or are you, because you're further away from America or wherever, or are you free of that?
Well, we're a very open economy. We're bound to be affected, but we're helped by the fact that the health of our financial institutions were relatively good compared to most countries in the world. So we were able to handle the direct financial effects. But obviously, as there is a downturn in the our key trading partners, our exports are affected, and tourism is affected, and we need to find ways of correcting that.
And to those people, those critics or cynics who say that this government will only last another 3 or 4 months, and then there'll have to be another new government and so on, and that in that sense Thailand's rather unstable, what do you say to those doubters, to those critics?
Well, what matters to me is not how long this government lasts, and if the changes of government come according to the Constitution, that's fine. What matters more to me is that every single day that we spend as government, we do it in a way that help the country and help lift the people out of the suffering that they've gone through over the last 2-3 years.
Prime Minister, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and I know you've got lots to do. Thank you very much indeed for joining us again.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Loyal viewers will remember that on last week's programme, I interviewed the director of Oxfam, Barbara Stocking. At the time, we were only able to talk, all we had time for was to talk about the cholera crisis in Zimbabwe. But there was so much more to talk about, so we carried on, talking about the role of Oxfam in particular, charities in general, in the world. What is their future too? I began by asking her how the competing problems of credit crunch and global warming are affecting their work.
In 2005, we had the great Make Poverty history, and money started coming through more for aid and debt relief, and there was a sort of sense for a year or two that we might really be moving on in terms of dealing with serious poverty in the world. Sadly, because of the things that you've just said, it looks as if things, if we're not very careful, are going to go backwards, and backwards very badly. If I pick up climate change, that is probably the most severe thing that can possibly affect poor people, and we're already seeing it. It's not that it's the future. Climate change has already affected poor people very badly. And let me give you the 2 reasons. One is particularly the number of emergencies, the number of extreme weather events, hurricanes, cyclones and so on, has increased by something like 4 times since 1980. Huge increase. So, and of course it's poor people that get affected the worst by that. And on top of that, because the climate is changing, then poor people, mainly in agriculture, have no idea when to plant, what the climate's going to do, when their seeds are going to be washed away having been planted. So again, poor people already deeply affected by climate change.
Poor people much more, obviously, for the reasons you say.
Yeah, much more obviously. They're living in the areas affected by climate change the most, sub-Saharan Africa, coastal regions. Like you think about Bangladesh, the coasts of Vietnam, where the sea level is already rising. So they're already in the places most affected, and they are the least able to cope. They're living in houses which are the easiest to come down in a hurricane. They have no insurance for their crops, all those things. So it's not a future, it's now.
How do you alleviate climate change, however, without spending your entire budget on that rather than on bread?
Right. Well, first of all, Oxfam, as you probably know, is an organisation that thinks you can change the world. It really is possible to change some of these policies that end up with poor people living in this way. And of course, for us, the biggest issue for the next year is that the climate change negotiations in Copenhagen come through in a way that delivers, that makes sure we don't go above an increased temperature of the world of 2 degrees centigrade. Can't be. So Copenhagen must deliver that, but it must deliver it in a way that actually helps poor people. Helps poor people by getting money to them from the people who have caused the problem, people in the north, people who've already done all their carbon emissions. Money going to the people in developing countries so that, first of all, they can continue to develop, but also that they have the money to do the changes needed to deal with this climate change. And that can be anything from flood defences to actually growing many more mangroves along the coast so that the coasts are protected more, to the sorts of farmers that I'm talking about, particularly women, where you might just need more of seed banks so that you can grow the seeds if they've been washed away.
Food for the poor and so on, that basic battle, is that being won at the moment?
No. No, and in a way for a whole mixture of reasons. I mean, food prices went up this year partly because of climate change, the weather. It started really out of the Australian drought, the beginnings of that. Then you've got the fact that something like 30% of it seems to have been caused by the move to biofuels, particularly in the northern countries, America and the EU. But on top of that, you've also got a growing middle class across the world that is beginning to want to eat meat, and of course meat takes a lot more grain to produce than just eating the grain itself. So the world is changing anyway. There is going to be food scarcity, or food scarcity for poor people, because it's actually about buying power in the end. So our job actually is, first of all, is really to lobby and work on the ground for much better agricultural development, getting food into markets and so on, getting better basic rural infrastructure. That's all needed if there isn't going to be food crises going on for years, really.
But will Africa always need Oxfam, or will it one day not need it?
I hope it won't need Oxfam one day. There's nothing wrong with Africa that it can't get out of poverty, and in fact in the last few years we've seen a great strides forward. I mean, we know the countries where there's very poor governance, but there are other countries that are really moving ahead. Ghana, Mozambique, countries that are really getting a grip on their own development. We've had much more foreign investment, in fact. I mean, companies have really seen that actually the future is Africa. So all that, gives you a lot of hope. Now, our job at the moment is to stop this all going backwards, whether it's food production or climate change. But no, in one day, Oxfam should not be there in Africa.
Thank you very much, Barbara.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.